Hello, welcome back to the advisory deck. It's Troy Forrest from Strategy Road and James McGill from Chatham Capital. How are you, James?
I'm good, Troy, thank you.
Good to hear. We've brought the advisory deck outdoors today because it's a glorious Adelaide spring morning. We're sitting here overlooking Victoria Park in Adelaide, and James and I are having a conversation about an advisory board session that we held just the other day, and we thought it'd be worthwhile reflecting on what came from that kind of a conversation. We were working with a small business owner, someone who's really quite successful, and their success continues to grow, but it highlighted to us the value and a few key elements of what makes an advisory board and the benefit of external counsel and different thoughts and perspectives truly valuable to someone. So an interesting conversation, right, James?
Yeah, it was, and it's one of those great conversations with the person who has a lot of energy. Right? So they walk into the room, and whether it's with us in the session we had earlier this week, or it's in a client, and they walk into the room and there's energy there. And I think that's engaging for people. And I think, you know, as an aside, for people to think about how do they get represented by their teams out in the field, or their teams in call centres, whatever it might be, that energy is so infectious and so enthusiastic. It's a really positive personal attribute. But the interesting thing with this person is that they're an award winner. They're high profile in their industry, and they're high profile in the target markets that they're going after. They've got runs on the board. They're very credible. They're a sole operator, and what they're finding is, I think, because of their success and their personality and their individual brand and what they've delivered in the last 3 or 4 years, they get phone calls from potential clients who are asking them to do things. And part of our discussion earlier this week was that the clients that are calling aren't really the clients that she wants. They're okay clients. Some of them are very good clients in terms of who they are, but they're not the work that she wants to be doing, and she's getting distracted from what her target market really should be, or what she wants it to be, versus the people who are calling up. And that was part of our discussion, and it's a really interesting thing for small business owners especially, where you don't necessarily have a strategy. You're not checking yourself on a regular basis internally about why are we pursuing these clients. They're not the ones that we were after, but also being brave enough to say no to someone, because as a small business owner, revenue is pretty important, right? And I think that was part of the conversation, as well as how do you get to a point where you stop saying yes to clients that aren't the ones you want?
Yes.
How do you go through that process to get to the 3 or 4 or 5 clients that you really do want? So it was an interesting discussion, and I think for me it was a reminder about, no matter how successful you are, when you're in a sole business, or in a business of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, where one is really the owner and the others are doers, how lonely it can be and how confusing it can be to figure out how you get from where you are to really where you want to be. And that's where you want to be, is where you started with a dream 2, 5, 10 years ago, and you wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm busy and I'm making money, but this isn't where I thought I'd be.
Yeah, absolutely. It highlighted to me, as someone who's worked with people in coaching programs for a really long time, around the value of having someone really challenge you and force you to get as specific and clean and clear as you can about your goals in the first instance, and then I suppose to challenge any preconceptions that you might have. And it's something I've observed about working with really successful people over time. You start to extrapolate out your thinking that, well, my thinking was right and successful because it got me this kind of result. Well, I'm going to apply that in these other areas of my business, and having another head or a couple of heads come in and say, well, why is that the case? What evidence points do you have for that? In fact, may something else be the case here as well? And so that's part, tough love sounding board, which is a really brave thing for someone to do, to allow someone to come in and help them in that capacity. Part different perspective setter as well, but really helping you hone in on, okay, really, where's the best use of my finite time and energy going to be, if this is what I'm really looking to achieve in my business, further out, and getting you out of that very tactical, operational, day in, day out, on the treadmill, just going so fast all the time. Stop, breathe, think, recalibrate. Yeah,
spot on. I was at a session last night with a group of, it was a mixed group, a group of entrepreneurs, people who have built businesses, built a lot of tech businesses and others, and had successful exits, and investors. So it was we were hearing pitches from a couple of companies, and it was a really interesting session. And the guest speaker, a very successful South Australian who's built national businesses a number of times on a large scale and sold them to large listed corporates. So this is the person who's got runs on the board, and he's got the profile in the industry as the person that's done this. And he said again and again in his presentation last night, this business partner, 50-50 owner in this business, who sits behind the scenes, and he said they're quite deliberate in it, who's the technical person working on finding the right businesses and building up and doing the data management and so forth, and then who's sitting more strategically. And I think it was a great insight into the success here, where one person has the profile and is happy to have it and the other one doesn't. But they have different skill sets, and he spoke frequently through the 20-minute presentation about how they check each other, how they challenge each other, and they do it from the right set and the same set of core values, but they do that again and again to make sure they're heading in the right direction. And that's what struck me from the conversation we had earlier this week, was that as a sole operator, and whether that's a sole operator, as I said before, with one person only in the business or one that's got a team, if you don't have that ability to continually check, I'm not talking every half an hour, but on a regular basis, go, are we going in the right direction? It can be a bit lonely. We spent 2 hours with her, and I think in 1 hour we wrapped up a solution to deal with a problem in the core business around really who are those target clients, how should that approach be structured to go and get them, and some of them, I guess, more detailed discussions around sales process and so forth. It didn't take a lot of time.
No.
Right? We weren't having to spend 5 hours on a particular issue and then spend 20 hours writing business plans and then go and spend more time doing something else. It doesn't have to be a huge process. It was relatively sharp. The second part of the session, of the second hour, was on a business model that is coming to life. And again, it was, well, we're not going to build this thing in 3 years or 5 years, because guess what? If you did this last year, in October of 2019, no one planned for COVID.
No.
Right? So I think this idea that you need to spend a lot of time doing 3 and 5 year business plans, especially for emerging businesses, is a bit flawed. And you can spend an hour, and if you're talking to the right people, you can get a lot out of an hour and walk out with some clarity and going, right, now I'm back, I'm focused, here's what I need to go and do next. So if you haven't got it in your team, and a lot of small businesses don't, and you don't want to carry that cost either, find people who can help you, because I think it's an hour can be a transformative discussion. And that's what I took away from that session for her, was I think it was her verbalising, having the chance to put some things out and have someone else challenge it in a positive way. It's very hard to do that by yourself.
Well, I think, and it doesn't matter whether you're a sole trader or a leader of a business that just sort of lies there at night and thinks about things and tries to frame decisions up in your head without the benefit of that sort of sounding board. Just to have someone there with some experience who you can articulate, hear the words come out of your mouth, talking about your value proposition, your elevator pitch, your target audience, your strategy for going there, just to read the look on other people's faces and then go, actually, now that I've said that and now that I've heard your response to that, let's talk about where the flaws in my thinking might be. 9 parts out of 10 of that might be bang on, but the value of having that sort of refined. We lie awake at 3 a.m. as business owners worrying about some of these things. Bring someone in, have someone, a colleague, an external advisor to do that. It can be really powerful, right?
It can be. Pick up a sports analogy. AFL teams, I think, probably overcrowded in the coaches' boxes, and that's had to change this year. But we're seeing a trend towards the younger coaches, and football clubs saying, well, you're the young coach, you're the future, which is great, you've got your assistant coaches, but let's put someone who's got 20 years more experience around you as a mentor, not to be there in game day, but to talk about the longer term activities. And that might be a conversation that's an hour or two a week or once every fortnight. And I think that's what we're talking about here in an advisory board kind of sense, or a sounding board or a mentor, is just having that person who isn't embedded in your business, who isn't dealing with the day-to-day things, but can step back and say, well, we were talking about this, what happened to that idea? How's that opportunity? How does that look from a client perspective? Otherwise it gets very, very easy just to get so buried in what you're thinking and doing.
Sure
So I think that's something which I think we'll see more and more in the next 2, 3, 4 years of people going, you know what, I'm not going to do it all by myself. I need to find someone to help me, and I don't have to spend a lot of money to do it.
Yes.
And I don't have to spend a lot of time to do it. That value of the 1 or 2 hour conversations can be really, really important. So that was, I think, just the front of mind from our conversation earlier this week.
Oh, and look, functionally and emotionally, for a lonely, stressed business leader of any sort, the value of having someone in your corner briefly to help, it's immense. So that's the space that we work in. Obviously, if you'd like to have a conversation or engage with us about that sort of a relationship, please, details down the bottom here, get in touch. James, thanks so much for your thoughts and insights.
Great to chat on such a perfect morning. We'll have to spin the camera around, Troy, and show them what we're looking at here.
Cyclists whizzing around here as well. Look forward to seeing you again soon on The Advisory Deck.